Ever wondered how the ancient Greeks imagined the structure of the world before satellites or modern geography existed? Well, the answer is pretty absurd, at least from our current perspective. For centuries, many Greeks thought that the Earth was flat and that it was floating on some kind of cosmic ocean, supported, according to some versions, by invisible giant columns or even mythological animals. Yes, you heard right. Although the most famous image of this type comes from Hinduism, that of the world supported by elephants on a giant turtle. Don't think the Greeks were far behind in terms of creativity. For example, Homer, in his works, suggests that the Earth was surrounded by a river called Ocean, a kind of ring of water that contained everything. Later, Anaximander, a pre-Socratic philosopher, proposed that the Earth did not need any physical support, but rather floated in space by symmetrical balance, as if suspended because there was no reason for it to move anywhere. It sounds almost modern, right? But back in the day, that was almost philosophical sorcery. And of course, there was no shortage of even crazier theories. Some stories spoke of giants or titans carrying the world. And of course, there's Atlas, the titan cursed to hold the heavens on his shoulders for all eternity. Although many believe that it carried the planet Earth, what it was really holding was the celestial vault, but hey, the error was so common that it even has a continent named after it. These ideas may seem crazy to us today, but at the time they were genuine attempts to understand the incomprehensible. And the most curious thing is that many of these beliefs coexisted at the same time. For some, the Earth was on columns. For others, it floated alone, and for others, it was an island in an endless sea. In short, if you scoffed at one theory, you might find yourself confronted with an even stranger one right after. The ancient world was an all-you-can-eat buffet of absurd and wonderful ideas. He tells you that you are suffering from excess black bile. Strange? For the ancient Greeks, that made perfect sense. One of the most curious and frankly absurd ideas of ancient Greece was the theory of the four humors. This theory, which would dominate Western medicine for over 1,000 years, stated that the human body was composed of four main fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. And according to them, everything in your life depended on the balance between those liquids. From your health to your personality. Are you a cheerful, optimistic, and active person? Then you have excess blood. Are you cold, calm, and slow? Phlegm. Are you aggressive and short-tempered? Too much yellow bile. Sad, melancholic, and artistic? Clearly, that's black bile. This idea was so influential that even human temperament was classified according to these humors: sanguine, phlegmatic, choleric, and melancholic. And yes, people were diagnosed and treated based on that. If you were sick, it was because one of your humors was unbalanced. So treatments included things like bloodletting, literally drawing blood from you, induced vomiting, bowel purges, and strict diets. But that's not all. They also believed that the weather, the seasons, your diet, and even your emotions influenced your moods. Angry in the summer? Your yellow bile must have been unleashed by the heat. Sad in winter? The work of black bile, no doubt. This theory was promoted by such respected figures as Hippocrates, considered the father of medicine, and later Galen, whose ideas dominated Europe throughout the Middle Ages. No one dared to contradict them because, well, they were the absolute authority. Today we know that all of that was nonsense. But you have to admit it was an elegant system, one that attempted to make sense of the human body without microscopes or blood tests. A kind of mix between medicine, astrology, and magic. The most absurd thing? That many of these ideas continued to be used until the 19th century. So if you've ever wondered why some ancient cartoons used leeches to draw blood from sick people, you know who to blame: the Greeks and their beloved humor. We see a comet crossing the sky and we think, how beautiful. If you were an ancient Greek, on the other hand, you would probably be preparing for war, a plague, or the fall of an empire. For them, comets and other celestial phenomena were not simple celestial bodies, they were divine signs. Direct messages from the gods. And the worst part is, they were never good news. A bright comet appears? That can only mean one thing: catastrophe is on the way. Many Greeks believed that the gods used the sky as a kind of cosmic billboard to warn us or punish us. So, whenever they saw something unusual in the sky, like an eclipse or a particularly bright shooting star, fear spread faster than a rumor in an Athenian marketplace. And this was not just a matter for the common people. Even kings and generals consulted astrologers and priests before acting. If the sky was not right, treaties were not signed, wars were not declared, and much less were cities founded. A famous example, the comet that appeared shortly before the death of Alexander the Great, was interpreted by many as a divine warning. Some saw it as Alexander's own soul ascending to the heavens, while others believed it was a warning that his empire would collapse, which indeed it did. Even Aristotle, the great philosopher, although he tried to give a more natural explanation to these phenomena, he could not completely shake off the idea that celestial events were linked to human destiny. And of course, in a world without telescopes or modern science, it's not so far-fetched to think that a huge beam of light crossing the sky would make your hair stand on end. But the absurd thing is that it was thought that these lights were the mythological equivalent of a spoiler from the gods. If you saw it, it was because something tragic was about to happen, and there was no escape. Thought ancient biology had solid foundations, think again. Among the many absurd things the Greeks believed, one of the craziest is that some animals did not need parents to be born. Literally, they appeared by magic or by contact with objects. One of the strangest and funniest examples is the case of wooden fish. Yes, just as it sounds. In ancient Greece, some believed that certain types of fish, especially in rivers and ponds, they were born spontaneously from pieces of rotten wood that fell into the water. The logic went something like this: if you leave wood underwater long enough, sooner or later, boom, fish. These kinds of beliefs came from an idea called spontaneous generation, according to which life could arise from nothing if the conditions were right. And it didn't just apply to fish. The maggots were born from the rotting flesh. Mice would appear in grain piles if they were not cleaned properly. And the lice, well, they were practically inevitable. Even great thinkers like Aristotle defended these ideas. According to him, not all living beings came from other living beings. Some simply emerged from the earth, the mud, or the water, as if by a vital impulse that was everywhere. But the craziest thing is that this belief survived for centuries. It wasn't until the 17th century, more than 2,000 years later, that scientists like Francesco Redi began to debunk the idea with controlled experiments. Imagine living in a time when people could say, in all seriousness, that fish came from tree trunks, and no one laughed. In fact, many believed it with devotion. So the next time you see a fish tank, thank modern science that we no longer put rotten wood in there expecting natural miracles. Ancient Greeks were true pioneers of medicine, but also of belief in absurd potions that would raise the eyebrows of even the most credulous today. In his world, the lines between medicine, magic, and superstition were very blurred. If you got sick, you were given a herbal infusion or a concoction with ingredients that today we would consider closer to a witch's recipe than a doctor's. Any examples? Here are some real gems from Greek medicine. Dried, pulverized human or animal excrement, used to cure infections or, yes, as a painkiller. Menstrual blood as a magical treatment in certain rituals. Organs of sacrificed animals, especially hearts and livers, were ground to prepare elixirs that were said to impart strength or courage. Crushed stones from sacred temples, which some healers claimed could absorb diseases from the body. They literally believed that the sacred place could purify you from within. And let's not forget the amulets, prayers, and sacrifices that were considered an essential part of treatment. Because of course, if the gods were upset, no syrup was going to save you, you had to make peace with the divine first. One of the most famous compounds of the time was the theriac, a mixture of more than 60 ingredients. Yes, 60, which included viper meat, myrrh, wine, opium, cinnamon, duck blood, and even Nile soil. It was so complex and expensive that it was used as a universal miracle cure, a true VIP elixir. And the most absurd thing is that these formulas, with slight changes, were used until the Middle Ages. Some doctors prescribed potions with ingredients as rare as unicorn horns. Yes, what they believed was unicorn horn, or ashes of Egyptian mummies, which were imported and sold as medicine. In short, if you got sick in ancient Greece, you could end up drinking things you wouldn't let anywhere near your mouth today. And all in the hope that the gods, the planets, and your stomach would cooperate at the same time.